The radio sat on the windowsill of Grandma Evelyn's old farmhouse like it had grown roots there. Dust clung to its dials, the wood casing slightly warped from years of summer heat and winter chill. It didn't look like much, just a mid-century Zenith with tarnished knobs and a worn mesh speaker. But everyone in the family knew it wasn't just a radio. It was her radio, and it only ever played one song. No matter when you turned it on, no matter how you adjusted the dials, no matter how far from the city stations you were, the same song floated out of the speakers. In the Garden, a hymn from the 1910s that Grandma Evelyn loved. It didn't matter that the radio wasn't plugged in, or that the nearest station hadn't broadcast that song in decades. If you pressed the power button, the gentle voice of a long-dead baritone would begin. I come to the garden alone while the dew is still on the roses. Everyone thought it was charming, until Evelyn died, and the radio kept playing. Clara was 28 when her grandmother passed. She had grown up visiting the farmhouse every summer, chasing fireflies in the garden, sipping lemonade on the porch swing, and falling asleep to the soft hum of that hymn drifting down the hallway. Evelyn had been more than a grandmother. She was the family anchor, quiet, kind, filled with old stories and gentle touches. She made everything feel safe. The funeral was simple. Evelyn wouldn't have wanted anything grand. But when the house was left to Clara, that's when things began to change. Clara moved in 2 weeks later. She had no other family close by. Her job was remote. Her relationship had ended a month prior, and the city felt like a coat that no longer fit. So she packed her things and returned to the place that had once felt like home. The farmhouse was still, too still. The silence stretched out in every room like a question no one could answer. On her first night, Clara walked into the living room and stared at the radio. She hadn't touched it in years. She sat down on the armchair across from it. She reached forward. She pressed the power button. A moment of static. Then, in the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. Same song, same warm baritone. Same gentle vinyl crackle beneath the melody. She leaned back, letting the music wash over her. But when the song ended, the silence didn't return. The radio played it again, from the top. Exactly the same. Clara furrowed her brow. She turned the dial. Nothing changed. No new stations, no static, just the same song. She unplugged the radio. The song kept playing. By the end of the week, it had become routine. Wake up, coffee, work, dinner, and the song. Always there, always unchanged. She tried ignoring it. She tried moving the radio to the attic. But even upstairs, the song still played. And not just quietly. It filled the room like it was meant to be heard. Finally, Clara gave up fighting it. Instead, she began to listen. And that's when she noticed something strange. It happened on a Wednesday. Clara was in the kitchen, drying dishes, when the song began its third loop of the evening. But this time it was slower, not by much, barely noticeable, but enough that Clara turned, sponge in hand, and stared down the hall at the living room. She walked in, stood in front of the radio, and listened. The singer's voice trembled in a way it never had before. And just before the final note faded, a whisper, not from the singer, not from the song, a whisper beneath it, just a breath of sound, like a sigh, like someone trying to speak through static. Clara stepped back. She turned off the radio. The room went still, but her heart didn't. That night, Clara dreamed of the garden, not the one in the backyard, the old garden, her grandmother's garden. But it was blooming in colors Clara didn't remember. And at the center of it stood Evelyn, younger, radiant, dressed in white. She smiled, lifted a finger to her lips, and pointed at the radio. When Clara woke up, her pillow was wet with tears. She went straight to the attic. She opened the radio's back panel. Inside was nothing unusual. Wiring, dust, the faded label from a repair shop in 1962. But taped to the inside of the wood, hidden behind a coil of wire, was a folded sheet of paper. Clara pulled it out. It was a note, written in her grandmother's handwriting. If you're reading this, the song has changed. It means I'm ready to tell you the story. But you have to listen, really listen. Start with the voice beneath the music. It's where everything begins. Clara stared at the note, hands shaking. The song was changing, and the radio wasn't just playing music. It was telling a story Evelyn had never told in life. And now it was Clara's turn to hear it. The second night after her grandma passed away, I couldn't sleep. There was something haunting about the quietness of her house, the kind of stillness that wasn't peaceful, but hollow, like the silence was waiting for something to arrive, or maybe waiting for something to be heard. I lay curled up in her bed, under the quilt she had sewn herself decades ago. The fabric still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume. The scent made me feel both safe and achingly alone. That's when I heard it again. The radio. The same old song, the one that had played every evening like clockwork for as long as I could remember. The familiar melody drifted through the thin walls, soft, scratchy, little distorted from age. It was coming from the small wooden radio that sat in the living room, the one Grandma never let anyone touch. Except this time something was different. I sat up, heart suddenly pounding. I tiptoed down the hallway barefoot, the wooden floor creaking beneath me with every step. The song was still playing, but as I got closer, I heard something else beneath the music, a whisper. Faint, almost like static, but definitely a voice. I knelt in front of the radio, staring at it like it might spring to life. My fingers hovered over the dial, but I didn't touch it. I didn't want to scare whatever it was away. The whisper grew clearer, just a little. I leaned in. Elizabeth? I froze. That was my grandmother's name. Not Grandma, not Nana. Elizabeth. The voice didn't sound like hers. It was male, tired, gentle, as if it had been waiting a long time to speak. I hope you still remember. Then the music swelled again, drowning out the voice. I grabbed the radio and shook it. Hello, who are you? But the whisper was gone. The song played on. I stayed there for another hour, hoping it would return. But it never did. The next morning, I called my mom. I told her everything. She laughed nervously. It's probably just some old recording glitch. That radio's ancient. Maybe it's picking up another station. But it wasn't a station. It said her name, Elizabeth. There was a long pause. What song was it? She asked quietly. I told her. It was always the same one. My darling Clementine. Her voice caught. That was your grandfather's favorite. He used to sing it to her when they were first married. I thought Grandpa died before I was born. He did, when I was 13. She didn't say anything more, but I could tell her thoughts were spinning, just like mine. That afternoon, I did something I had never dared to do. I opened the back panel of the radio. It took me a while to find the right screwdriver. The wood was so old it felt like it might crack under pressure. But eventually the panel came loose, revealing the insides of the radio, dusty wires, copper coils, and something else. A small, folded piece of yellowed paper tucked deep inside. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out. It was a letter, addressed to E.W., Elizabeth Walker, my grandma. The handwriting was shaky but neat. I unfolded it slowly, heart racing. My dearest Elizabeth, if you are reading this, then somehow, miraculously, you've found what I hid. I never got to say goodbye. I'm sorry I had to leave the way I did. There are things I never told you, things I wish I had the courage to speak out loud. But I thought maybe one day this letter and this song might reach you when it matters most. I stopped reading, breath caught in my throat. This letter was from my grandfather, the man I had never met, the man who, until now, was just a face in faded photographs, a name on a gravestone. I kept reading. When I bought this radio, I asked them to modify it, just a little, a small voice recorder hidden inside. I recorded myself just once. I don't know if it will still work after all these years, but I wanted you to hear my voice one last time. The voice, last night, that whisper, he had recorded himself decades ago, and it still worked. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried. Not just for him, but for Grandma, for the love they shared, for the years lost, and for the voice that waited patiently to be heard. That evening, I turned the radio on again. Same song, same melody, but this time I listened differently. I closed my eyes, I breathed in the music, and I waited. And then there it was, my darling Clementine. The whisper began to hum along. I remember the way you smiled when I sang this. A tear slipped down my cheek. I remember the baby blanket you made. It had daisies on it. You said you were saving it for someone special. I gasped. That blanket was mine. I knew then somehow you'd live long enough to see her born. Me. He knew about me. I couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went to the attic. I needed more answers, letters, tapes, anything. What I found instead was a box, sealed, tied with a red ribbon, and inside a vinyl record with a handwritten label for the day the song stops. I didn't understand, but somehow I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. I held the vinyl record in my hands as if it might vanish. It was old, wrapped in thin paper yellowed with time, bound in a red ribbon that had faded into a dusty rose. Across the center, in neat handwriting, were the words, "For the day the song stops." The moment felt sacred, as though I had opened something meant to remain untouched until precisely this moment. My fingers trembled. I didn't even own a record player, but I knew who did. A few blocks away lived Mr. Henderson, my grandmother's old neighbor and longtime friend. He and Grandma used to sit on the porch and argue about jazz versus classical. He loved jazz. Grandma insisted melody told the truth better. He opened his door wearing the same cardigan he'd worn for 20 years. When I showed him the record, his eyes lit up, but he also frowned. "Your grandma gave you this?" he asked. "Not exactly. I found it in the attic." It was sealed in a box with her handwriting. He looked down at the record. "I remember when she recorded that," he said quietly. "She wouldn't tell me what was on it. Just said, 'One day it'll matter, but not yet.'" I asked him if we could play it. He nodded once and led me to his living room, where a record player sat on a cabinet like a museum piece. It took him a few minutes to clean the needle and dust off the surface. Then he gently placed the record onto the turntable. The room went still. A soft crackle filled the silence. And then music. But it wasn't the old song from the radio. It was something else. A melody I had never heard before. Slow, lyrical, wistful. The kind of tune that makes your heart ache without knowing why. And over the music, a voice. My grandmother's voice. "If you're hearing this, it means the old radio finally let go, and you're ready." Her voice was younger, lighter, almost dreamy. "This melody, it's the song I wrote for your grandfather. Not my darling Clementine. That was his song. This one was mine." I sat on the edge of the couch, eyes burning. I had never heard Grandma sing, not once. But here she was, her voice carrying through the years, threading through the melody she had written herself. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and it was beautiful. She continued, "He used to say my voice was the first thing he ever wanted to wake up to, so I wrote this song while he was away at war. I sent it to him on a cassette tape, but he never got it. The letter came back, deceased. That was the end. I could feel Mr. Henderson watching me, but I couldn't look away, couldn't breathe. After that, I stopped singing, I stopped writing, I stopped being the girl he loved." Her voice cracked a little, just slightly, but I kept the melody, and I hid it for someone who might one day want to hear who I really was. Not just the grandmother who made apple pie and knitted scarves, but the woman who once wrote music with a heart that burned. The song played on, swelling softly. The violins rose like they were carrying her words into the sky. If you're that person, then I want you to know, love doesn't end. It just changes shape. It becomes a song only one person can hear until someone else listens close enough. The music faded. Silence. I didn't move. Not until Mr. Henderson placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "She never let anyone hear that," he said, "not even me." I blinked away tears. Why not? He looked at the record player, then back at me. Because she wasn't ready to remember. And maybe she was waiting for someone who was ready to remember for her. That night I returned home. I sat in front of the radio, the same place I had heard the whisper 2 nights before, but I didn't turn it on. I just sat there, listening, hoping, wondering. And then, as if on the radio turned on by itself, but it didn't play My Darling Clementine. It played the melody. Her melody. I gasped. The exact same recording I had just heard on the vinyl began to play through the radio speaker. Except something was different. There was an echo, a second voice underneath hers. A man's voice, singing, harmonizing, soft, raspy, familiar. It was him, my grandfather. They'd recorded it together. Or maybe, somehow, the song had found him too. My entire body shivered as the harmony wrapped around me like a blanket made of stars. And when the song ended, one final line played, barely audible. "I found you, Lizzie. I never stopped listening." I pressed my hand against the radio and whispered. Neither did she. That night, I didn't cry because I missed her. I cried because I finally heard her. Not the silence she left behind, but the melody she hid. And it was beautiful. I thought the story ended with the melody. I thought the song, Grandma's Song, was the final chapter in a love story long buried beneath dust, time, and silence. But stories like hers, they don't just end, they wait. It started the next morning. I couldn't stop thinking about the message hidden in the music, the way her voice returned to me, the way his voice echoed beneath hers like an old promise rediscovered. I returned to the living room and stared at the radio. It sat there, quiet now, almost ordinary. But I knew better. This thing, it held more than music. It held memories, ghosts, messages meant for the future, meant for someone who could listen differently. I decided to open it again. I had unscrewed the back once before, but this time I felt more deliberate, like I wasn't searching blindly anymore. I was following her breadcrumbs. As I gently removed the panel, something small and heavy clattered onto the rug. It was a cassette tape, not a letter, not a photograph. A tape, labeled in Grandma's handwriting. "Do not play unless you're ready." The words made my stomach flip. What did that even mean? I called Mr. Henderson. "Did you know about this?" I asked, breathless. I told him about the tape, the label, the strange warning. There was a long pause. "I didn't," he finally said, "but I'm not surprised. She hid everything in that radio." "Because it was hers," he said softly. It was the one place she felt safe enough to keep the truth. Back at his house, I handed him the tape. His old cassette player groaned as he slid it in. He adjusted the volume. "You sure you want to hear this?" I nodded. He pressed play. For a moment, nothing, just static, a low hum, then a voice. But not hers, not Grandma. It was a child. "Hi, I guess if you're listening, you're me," I gasped. My hand flew to my mouth. "Or maybe you're her granddaughter. My name is Rachel. I'm 12 years old, and I live with Elizabeth Walker. She's my grandma, but she doesn't call me that in front of people. She says I'm just the neighbor girl because no one can know I live here." The world tilted sideways. "Rachel?" Who was Rachel? The recording continued. "I don't know where my mom is. She left me at Grandma's house 3 years ago. She said she'd come back. She never did." I couldn't breathe. "Grandma doesn't tell people about me. She says they wouldn't understand. She says I remind her of someone she used to know." The voice cracked. "Sometimes I hear her talking to the radio. She thinks it talks back." Mr. Henderson looked over at me, shocked. We kept listening. "She plays one song all the time, the same one, My Darling Clementine. She says it keeps the memory alive, that if she plays it enough, maybe he'll come home." There was a pause, a shaky breath. "I don't think she means my mom. I think she means someone else, a man she lost. Maybe the man she wanted to love more than anyone." The tape clicked. Then a second voice, Grandma's voice, but older, weary. "If you've made it this far, then you found the part of me I tried to forget." Her words moved slowly, like they weighed more than they should. Rachel wasn't just a girl. She was a shadow, a mirror, a second chance I didn't ask for. I closed my eyes. She was the daughter I never had, or maybe the granddaughter I couldn't love yet. Because every time I looked at her, I saw the woman who took him away, the woman your grandfather loved before me. Everything cracked inside me. I knew this wasn't just about me, or even about Grandma and Grandpa. There was someone else. A woman Grandma had once resented, a child she had taken in to try to forget, and a lifetime of guilt buried beneath melodies and silence. The recording continued. I tried to forgive. But love is strange. It doesn't just disappear. Sometimes it shifts, and sometimes it turns to regret. Her voice cracked again. "I made peace with it eventually, but Rachel, if you're out there, I'm sorry. I wasn't strong enough to love you the way you deserved." The tape ended. Silence filled the room. Mr. Henderson didn't say anything, neither did I. There were no words for what had just unraveled. Rachel, a girl who lived in Grandma's house, a secret no one knew, a wound Grandma never confessed. And yet, somehow, she recorded all of it, left it for me. Why? Because maybe she hoped I'd understand. Maybe she hoped I'd find her. Or maybe she hoped I was Rachel. I walked home in a daze. The radio sat in the corner, quiet again. But it didn't feel silent. It felt full, like it had more to say, like it was waiting for the right question. That night, I dreamed of a girl with braids and freckles. She stood at the edge of a dusty hallway holding a small music box. She didn't speak, but I knew her name, Rachel. The morning after I heard the name Rachel echo through the tape, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The voice of a 12-year-old girl tucked away in my grandmother's home, like a forgotten page in a story no one ever finished writing. She had lived there. She had existed. And yet, not a single photograph, document, or memory of her remained in anything my grandmother had left behind, except that single tape. It felt intentional, like Grandma had chosen what to erase and what to hide for someone else to find. I found myself drawn back to the attic. Maybe it was instinct, Maybe it was the melody that still lingered in my bones from the night before. But I climbed the creaky stairs, pulled down the old chain hanging from the ceiling, and stepped once more into the world of dust and shadows that Grandma had kept locked away for decades. This time, I wasn't looking for music. I was looking for Rachel. The attic was small, filled with old furniture draped in white sheets. I moved through it slowly, like walking through memories and mourning. That's when I saw it, a box wedged beneath an old rocking chair. It was plain, wooden with a rusted latch. No name, no label, but I knew. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside were a small velvet pouch, a faded, crumpled letter, and a child's drawing done in crayons. The drawing stopped my heart. It was of a girl, stick figure, smiling, holding hands with two taller figures. One labeled me, the other two labeled Grandma and him. There was no name for the man, only a heart drawn between him and Grandma, and a third figure, standing apart, crossed out in red crayon. The word written above her head, Mama. I unfolded the letter slowly. It wasn't in English, but I recognized the language. It was handwritten in Yiddish. My grandmother had rarely spoken it around me, but I had heard the rhythm in her prayers, the whisper of old lullabies. I didn't understand all the words, but I understood enough. My sweet child, if you are reading this, then you have found what I never had the strength to give you in person. I was afraid that love would make me weak again, afraid that if I let you in, I would see her in your eyes, and I would break all over again. Your mother took everything from me, or so I thought. But you were never hers to blame. You were innocent, and I failed you. I paused, my throat closed. I tried to be your guardian. I tried to be your teacher, but I could not be your mother. I left this letter in the language my own mother taught me, because sometimes pain needs translation. And sometimes the only way to tell the truth is in a language the heart remembers even when the mouth forgets. I sank to the floor. This wasn't just a confession. It was an apology wrapped in culture, memory, and grief. It was her way of finally speaking love, not in words I understood perfectly, but in meaning that shook my soul. My grandmother hadn't only lost her husband, she had lost a friend, a daughter, and a version of herself that believed she could still be whole. I opened the velvet pouch. Inside was a locket, small, oval. Inside, two photos. One of my grandmother, no older than 30, with bright eyes and a rare, unguarded smile. And beside it, a baby, dark curls, big eyes, dressed in yellow. There was no name, but I knew. Rachel. Suddenly I remembered something. Years ago, when I was 5 or 6, I had wandered into Grandma's room while she was changing the sheets. On her bedside table had been a photo frame. I remembered asking, "Is that Mommy?" And she had quickly covered it with a book. "No," she said, "that's nobody." But it wasn't nobody. It was Rachel. I held the letter in my hands and cried. Not just for Rachel, but for my grandmother, for all the words she never found in English, but had finally released in the language of her childhood. That night, I did something I never thought I would. I turned on the radio and I whispered, "Tell me more." Nothing happened at first. Then the volume dial turned on its own. A soft click, a new sound. Not music, a voice, hers. "If you're hearing this, then you found the locket and the letter. Good, because there's more. There's a name I buried so deep I thought I'd never say it again." She paused. Her name was Miriam. She was my best friend, and she became the woman he loved. They had a child together, Rachel. She wasn't supposed to end up with me, but life, it makes cruel choices. When Miriam died, he wasn't ready to raise her, and neither was I. But she came to me anyway. And I saw her mother in every breath she took. So I hit her. I told the world she was the neighbor's niece, a temporary guest. But she lived here. She lived here? I fell to my knees. My grandmother had raised Rachel in the shadows, out of guilt, out of love, out of grief. And she had never forgiven herself for doing it halfway. The voice faded. Then faintly, just beneath the static, a different voice. Young, fragile, Rachel's. I forgive you. 3 words. Clear, undeniable. Recorded from years ago. Or something else. I didn't know. But I believed it. I placed the locket on the shelf beside the radio. And for the first time in days, I slept. Not because the story was over, but because maybe, just maybe, the lost language of love had finally been spoken. There are stories that are told in words, passed around tables over cups of tea. And then there are stories buried in silence, woven into glances, regrets, and the things people never say out loud. I was beginning to realize my grandmother's life was mostly made of the second kind. After discovering the letter in Yiddish in Rachel's crayon drawing, something inside me had shifted. It was no longer just about the song. It was about the people that melody had hidden and the grief it had carried in every note. I spent that morning at the town library. I had one goal: find out who he really was. The man who had loved both my grandmother and Miriam. The man who had left Rachel behind. The man Grandma had waited for, even after saying he had never returned. His name had never been said in full, only fragments, hints. But now, with the locket, the tape, and Grandma's voice, I had enough to begin digging. In the town's war records, I found him, Aaron Leventhal, a young soldier drafted into World War II. A violinist, a man who had lived 3 blocks from where Grandma grew up. There was a photo attached to his enlistment file. Tall, dark-eyed, the same soft curl to his hair that Rachel had. He wasn't just Grandma's love. He was Rachel's father. But the record didn't end with killed in action. No, Aaron had been declared missing in 1944. Some believed he died in battle. Others thought he defected. Some rumors claimed he'd been injured and lost his memory. Nothing was ever confirmed. He had simply vanished. Back at home, I sat in front of the radio again. I placed the locket beside it, and I whispered, "Tell me the rest." The radio flickered. The volume turned. And then, if you're still listening, Grandma's voice. Then you deserve to know everything. Aaron didn't die in the war. He came back, but not to me. I froze. She had never said this before. Not on the previous tapes, not in any letters. He returned in 19 March. I didn't know, not until years later. By then, he was already with Miriam, already a father. He never reached out, and I told myself I wouldn't either. Because pride can wear a dress just as easily as grief. The pain in her voice felt physical. I married someone else. It didn't last. He was kind, but he wasn't Aaron. And when Miriam died suddenly, Aaron came to me with Rachel in his arms. He said he was leaving the country, said he couldn't raise her alone, asked me to take her, just for a while. I agreed, but he never came back. There was silence on the tape for a full minute. I thought it was over, but then her voice returned, softer now, more human. I don't know what happened to him. He was supposed to write, call, anything. He didn't. Maybe he meant to, maybe something stopped him, or maybe he couldn't face what he left behind. The next part wasn't her voice. It was his. Aaron. A voice, old and scratchy, playing from what must have been an even older tape. "Elizabeth, if you ever hear this, it means I didn't make it back. I'm sorry for everything. I loved you, even when I shouldn't have, even when I chose someone else. It wasn't because I stopped loving you. It was because I didn't deserve you. Rachel is..." Everything. She looks like Miriam, but she smiles like you. Please, don't let her grow up thinking she wasn't wanted. She was more than anything. I couldn't stop crying. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Like a man who had already buried himself in guilt long before the war could claim him. There was a date on the recording. 7 years after the war ended, he had been alive. Alive and lost. That night, I searched for any trace of him after 1951. There were no death certificates, no records, just a man-sized hole in the world where he should have been. As if, after leaving Rachel with Grandma, he'd simply disappeared again, this time for good. But one thing was clear, he hadn't stopped loving either of them. I went back to the attic one last time, and I found something I hadn't noticed before. Tucked behind a loose wooden panel, a small envelope, sealed with red wax. Inside, a photograph of Aaron holding baby Rachel and a pressed wildflower. On the back, in Grandma's handwriting, sometimes love is a song that only plays in silence. I placed the photograph on my desk beside the radio, and I whispered, "He came back, Grandma, even if only through your words." The radio stayed quiet, but I felt something loosen in the air, like the end of a note that had been held for too long, finally letting go. That night, I dreamed of a ballroom. Grandma, Aaron, Miriam, Rachel, all dancing in a room with no time, no bitterness, no regret, just music. The day after I found the photo of Aaron holding Rachel, I couldn't stop staring at the wildflower pressed beside it, a tiny thing, fragile and brown by time. And yet something about it felt loud. It whispered of memories buried too deep to speak aloud, of promises made beneath fading music, of a moment that must have meant everything to her. I needed to know more. That evening, I opened the drawer of Grandma's old dresser, one I'd barely touched since she passed. Tucked beneath layers of scarves and buttons was something unexpected, a journal. The cover was soft leather, worn at the edges. Inside, page after page of old-fashioned cursive. Some entries were about chores, baking, weather. But others felt like songs written without music. One entry stopped me cold. March 4th, 1942, the winter social. I thought he'd never ask, but he did, and we danced. The band played slow, something tender. He didn't lead, he let me. Said it was because I moved like moonlight. I laughed, and then I cried, because that's the moment I knew I'd love him even if he never came back. We promised to dance again when the war ended. Same place, same song, just us. My heart clenched. That was it. The night, the song, the dance. A memory so bright she had built her silence around it. I needed to find that place. I flipped the pages frantically until I found the location. Fairmont Town Hall, upstairs ballroom. It was still there, I checked online. Now used as a community center, mostly closed to the public. But I had to go. The next morning, I stood outside the old hall. Its bricks were crumbling, windows fogged, but the door was unlocked. Inside, the scent of dust and wood polish filled the air. I climbed the stairs to the ballroom. The floor creaked beneath me, and when I stepped into the room, my breath caught in my throat. It was all still there. The chandelier dimmed on age, the faded wallpaper peeling at the edges, and in the far corner, a dusty gramophone. Covered in a cloth, I walked toward it like I was approaching something sacred. On the table beside it lay a box of vinyl records. I sifted through them, heart pounding. Then I saw it. A record labeled simply March 4th for her. I placed it on the turntable, held my breath, and set the needle down. Soft static, then music. A slow, elegant waltz. Old, scratchy, imperfect, but full of soul. The melody made my chest ache because I recognized it. It was the same tune I had heard layered beneath My Darling Clementine, hidden like a ghost behind a more familiar song. She had masked it, buried it inside the radio's nightly ritual. But here in this room, it danced free. I closed my eyes, and I saw her. Elizabeth Walker, my grandmother, spinning across this floor in a simple blue dress, laughing, and Aaron beside her, letting her lead. Because you move like moonlight, he said. The music swelled, and something changed. A whisper. No, two voices. The recording wasn't just instrumental. Somewhere hidden beneath the notes they were speaking. Promise me. Her voice younger, light. Even if the war takes you, you'll come back here. We'll dance again. Then his voice. I will, no matter what. Same song, same song. My knees buckled. This wasn't a dance, it was a contract, a memory-turned vow. And when the war took him, when he returned not to her, but to someone else, she kept her part. She played the song over and over, night after night, hoping the echo of their promise would find him. I let the song finish. Then in the silence, I stepped onto the dance floor, and I began to move. Slow, unsure, but as I spun, I felt her. Her joy, her longing, her grief. I danced for her, for Rachel, for Aaron, for the part of my family's story that had lived too long in the shadows. Later that night, I returned to the house. I sat by the radio, and this time I didn't speak. I simply placed the record beside it and let the silence hold us both. Then, the radio lit up, all on its own. A voice crackled through, Grandma's, but not a recording. Live. Impossible, but real. You found it. My breath caught. You remembered. I nodded, tears sliding down my cheeks. He never came back to dance, but you did. That means more than I ever thought it would. The melody began to play through the radio, her melody. Then his voice joined in, not singing, but laughing, softly, lovingly. She still moves like moonlight. I cried openly, freely, because for the first time, their love didn't feel like a story I had to uncover. It felt like a legacy. I picked up the locket, held it close and whispered, I'll never forget your dance. And in the stillness, I could almost hear them say, Good, because now it's yours. They say memory fades with time, but sometimes the deepest promises don't live in memory at all. They live in the quiet things, in the way we arrange a room, in the music we play every evening, in the items we refuse to throw away, in the people we protect, even from the truth. That's where my grandmother kept her promise, not in spoken words, but in everything she touched. After I danced in the empty ballroom and heard their voices once more, something inside me settled. But the story wasn't over, because I still didn't know what the promise truly was. Not just the one to meet again after the war. No, there was something more. Something she had kept alive for 60 years without ever saying it out loud. I had to find it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room surrounded by her belongings. The radio, the locket, the box of letters, and that wildflower. I picked it up again, ran my finger over the brittle petals, and that's when I noticed it. The flower wasn't pressed flat. It had something tucked inside. A tiny roll of paper, so small it could have been missed by anyone not looking closely. I unrolled it gently. 6 words, written in faded ink. Don't let her think he left. My heart dropped. It wasn't about her, it was about Rachel. This whole time, the radio, the songs, the silence, they weren't only about Aaron. They were about the little girl he left behind. The girl Grandma raised in the shadows. The girl she never claimed. The girl she couldn't love the way she wanted to because she still ached from losing him. And yet, she had tried to keep one promise. To never let Rachel grow up thinking her father abandoned her, even if it meant lying. even if it meant rewriting every part of the story, even if it meant silencing her own pain every single day for 60 years. I placed the flower back in its pouch, tears already rising. Then I turned to the journal again, flipping through the back pages. One entry undated, was scrawled hastily, almost like she hadn't wanted to write it. She asked me today if he loved her. I said yes. She asked me why he didn't come back. I said he got lost on the way. She smiled and went back to her crayons. That smile cost me everything, but I'd do it again. I covered my mouth to stop the sob. This wasn't just grief, it was sacrifice. Every evening, Grandma played that same melody so Rachel would think her father was still out there listening. That was the real promise. Don't let her think he left. But Rachel had left too. No records, no trace, no mention of where she went after her teenage years. Grandma never spoke of it. But deep in the drawer, I found one last tape, unlabeled. I placed it in the cassette player and pressed play. Silence. Then, Elizabeth, a woman's voice, older now, mature but shaky. I hope this still reaches you. I found the melody again, at a train station of all places. Some man was humming it. I asked him what it was called. He said, the song no one remembers the name of. But I remembered. I always remembered. I wanted to say thank you. For the crayons, the late night tea, the bedtime stories I pretended not to like. I know now you were scared, you were hurting, but you didn't let that hurt touch me. Not really. That's love too. You kept your promise. I couldn't breathe. This was Rachel, alive, somewhere in the world, still carrying the melody, still remembering the woman who wasn't her mother, but who loved her anyway. The tape continued. I don't know if you're still there. I don't know if you still listen, but I kept the flower. It reminded me that even if you never said the words, you were always trying, and sometimes trying is the bravest love of all. I let the tape play to the end, then rewound it and played it again. Each word sank deeper. Each pause filled something that had long been empty in this house. When I turned off the player, I looked at the radio. It hadn't played the song in days. I placed my hand on it and whispered, "She remembers." The radio lit up, not with sound, just with a warm, gentle hum, like it was sighing, relieved. That night, I dreamt of my grandmother. She wasn't knitting, she wasn't baking. She was at the top of a hill, standing beneath a tree, Rachel's hand in hers. They were looking at the horizon, waiting for the music to start again. When I woke up, I took the flower, the locket, the tape, and walked to the garden. I buried them beneath the rose bush, not to hide them, but to return them, to let the promise rest, because it had been kept. It happened at 3:12 a.m. I remember the exact time because I'd fallen asleep on the couch, journal still open in my lap, and woke up to the radio turning on by itself. I hadn't touched it in days, not since I buried the flower, the locket, and the tape beneath Grandma's favorite rose bush. I thought the story was over, but stories like this never end quietly. There was no music, no static, just a hum, low, constant, like the sound the earth might make if it had a heartbeat. And then a voice, her voice. If you're hearing this, then it means you stayed. I sat up, blanket falling from my lap. Her voice was older now, tired but filled with warmth. I always wondered what it would feel like to let go, to say it, all of it. The truth I never spoke, the love I never claimed, the daughter I never had, the man I never stopped waiting for. They were never really mine, and still, they were everything. I pressed my hand against the radio. For years, I played that song not because I believed he would come back, but because I needed to believe I hadn't let him go in vain. I needed to believe the melody carried something more than sound, that it carried memory, that it carried me. Her voice cracked. But memory isn't meant to be a prison. It's meant to be a place we visit, not where we live. I felt the tears before I even realized I was crying. This was goodbye, but not just to her. To the silence, to the weight, to the questions that had shaped our family like shadows on the wall. If Rachel is listening, I'm sorry for the way I loved you too quietly, and for never saying it louder. But know this, I never let him go, not because I loved him more, but because letting go of him felt like losing you too, and I couldn't bear that. Then, silence. For a moment, I thought it was over, but the hum returned. And with it, a second voice, faint, male. Lizzie, Aaron. Even now, after everything, you kept your promise. I heard it every night. I followed the melody, and it brought me home. I gasped. The breath left my lungs. This wasn't a recording. This was something else. Something beyond time, beyond reason, beyond explanation. But real. Their voices began to speak over each other, not talking, remembering. The waltz at the winter social. You wore blue. You smelled like lilacs. You kissed me first. You shook so hard I thought you'd run away. I almost did. They laughed, soft, together. And then, tell our granddaughter. My heart stopped. They meant me. Thank you for dancing, for asking, for listening. You brought the song back. The melody began again. The original one, not my darling Clementine, but her melody, the one she wrote, the one he remembered, the one I now carried. And for the last time it played, I sat beside the radio, eyes closed, letting the music wrap around me. And when it ended, the radio clicked off, not just for the night, forever. I tried turning it back on. Nothing. The light was gone, the hum silent. Just a box now. Not a memory, not a vessel. Just a radio, empty, at peace. The next morning, I wrapped it gently in a cloth and placed it in the attic, beside her knitting needles and her wedding dress, and the box labeled someday, because someday had come. I stepped outside, the sun already rising. The rose bush swayed in the morning breeze, and there beside it, a wildflower had bloomed. I didn't turn the radio on again, not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood. The music had stopped not as an ending, but as a gesture, a bow, a final note. After 60 years, the song had finished playing itself out. And for the first time in my life, silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. I spent the morning in the garden. The rose bush where I'd buried the flower and the locket had grown fuller, brighter. A new bloom had opened, deep pink, almost red, with soft white edges. Beside it, the wildflower stood alone, delicate, tall, unshaken by the breeze. I smiled. I like to think it had been waiting all these years to bloom, just like her story, just like me. That afternoon, I received a letter, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, simple. I found it again, the shing. It played in a bakery in Lisbon, the same melody. I froze and I smiled. I knew it was you. You kept your promise. So did I. Rachel, alive, listening, still carrying the music across the world. I held the letter to my chest and cried. Not because I was sad, but because everything made sense now. The silence, the song, the way Grandma never told the full story out loud. She was waiting for someone to listen between the notes, to read between the lines, to understand the kind of love that doesn't speak loudly, but echoes forever. I began organizing the journals, the tapes, the photographs, even the old record, not to bury them, but to preserve them. Stories like this, they deserve to be told. Because they remind us that love is rarely perfect, that it's often broken, interrupted, delayed, but never lost. Not really. Weeks passed. And then one day I found myself back at the community hall. The ballroom hadn't changed. Dusty, quiet, still carrying the weight of memories that didn't belong to me, but had shaped me all the same. I brought a portable speaker, set it down in the middle of the floor, and played her melody one last time. Then I danced, alone, but never lonely, because I could feel them there. Grandma, Aaron, Rachel, all dancing beside me, their footsteps echoing in time with mine, their laughter twirling through the chandeliers, their promises held in every turn. As the final note faded, I stood in the middle of the room and closed my eyes. Let the silence come. Let it settle. Let it wrap around me like a warm coat after a long winter. That night, I placed the radio back in its original spot. Clean, quiet, at peace. Then I wrote a note and tucked it inside. This radio doesn't play anymore, but it once told the most beautiful story I've ever heard. If you listen closely, you might still hear it. I left the house a week later, not forever, but for now, because Grandma's story had been told, and it was time for me to begin writing my own. I took only 3 things with me: the melody, the locket, and the belief that sometimes the silence after the music stops is the part that stays with you the longest. The end of the melody, but not of the love.